What is up, everyone? I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Welcome to the Fun with Friends podcast, hosted by me, Allie, where I drag my friends along on various adventures, some more exhilarating than others, but all a pretty good time. Although this is called the Fun with Friends podcast, that doesn't mean that I'm always out there doing shit with my buddies. Sometimes I like to venture out on my own and enjoy something exciting. And that's precisely what I did when I attended the Death Becomes Us festival. This also means that you get to listen to my voice for the entire podcast and only my voice. So, get ready. So I'm a pretty big true crime fan, especially when it comes to podcasts. I'm a die-hard My Favorite Murder fan, or as we call ourselves, murderinos. So shout out to all my murderinos out there. And My Favorite Murder is a comedy podcast about true crime, which sounds a little strange, but for some reason it works, and it works extremely well. I'm also a huge fan of the Casefile podcast, mainly because listening to it helps me fall asleep. And that's because the host has a very soothing voice and an Australian accent, and it literally just lulls me to sleep. Even though he's talking about extremely brutal, gnarly crimes, it just puts me right to sleep. It's amazing. My favorites playlist, it would be made up of podcasts like I Survivor, Man in the Window, Teacher's Pet, True Crime All the Time, Someone Knows Something, and of course Serial, which I feel like is a staple for all true crime lovers. But yeah, I could go on and on about the number of podcasts related to true crime that I listen to, but what I want to do in this episode is tell you all about a festival that happens every year in DC that just really speaks to my dark little heart and soul. So let's jump into it. The Death Becomes Us True Crime Festival, according to their event page, is a true crime pop culture festival that is curated by Brightest Young Things. I'm honestly not sure how many times they've had the festival in DC. I think it's only been the last 2 years, 2018 and 2019, but I know that they've held it in other locations. Like in April of 2020, they're holding it in New York City. And I think they've put on the festival a total of 5 times. So maybe twice in DC and the other times in New York. I'm honestly not sure. But here in DC, the festival is usually held in November, early November. And they do one show on a Friday night. And then Saturday is just loaded with shows, like back-to-back shows. And then this year they did 2 shows on Sunday. And I feel like that's what they did last year as well. And so I want to take some time to kind of go into each of the shows, tell you about my favorite ones, and then my favorite parts of the festival in general. And I'll get into all of that here shortly. But first, I kind of want to talk about why I like going to the Death Becomes Us festival by myself. So as I mentioned, this is my second year going to the Death Becomes Us festival, and I've gone solo both times. One, because it can be difficult to find a friend who is as into true crime and murdery things as you are, that would want to spend an entire weekend at a true crime festival, or, you know, maybe they don't like any of the shows or the panels that are happening. So that's one reason. But I also like going to this event alone because there's really an awesome sense of community at this type of festival. It's literally just made up of people that have the same interest as you, and we're all kind of bonded together by our love of true crime. So it makes it super easy to talk to people online and to kind of find folks that you like vibe really well with. And then you can kind of just like roll through the festival with that same group of people, or, you know, just go off on your own. And the other thing I like is that there's a group of true crime lovers called the District of True Crime, and it was primarily a murderino group that was online, and then I think it kind of expanded to just all true crime lovers. And last year they did several meetups prior to the shows at some of the bars that are in the same area as the auditorium where the festival is held. So that was great because I got to go and meet new people. And again, we all had kind of a common interest, which gives us stuff to talk about. And then we all sat together throughout the festival, and that was really cool. This year, I didn't go to any meetups. I'm actually not sure if there were any, but I ended up spotting one of the ladies from last year's festival and recognized her, so we hung out during the Saturday and Sunday shows. And then we also met a few other ladies in line, and we kind of formed our own little group of like 3 to 4 people and just hung out and sat together and chilled between the shows. And yeah, it was just great. That's really one of my favorite things about the festival, is that kind of sense of community and how just friendly people are. You can just start conversations with strangers in line, and before you know it, you're like chilling with them for the entire day. So that's really something that I like about the festival. Before we jump into the 2019 festival, I want to touch on 2018. I'm not going to lie, one of the main reasons I got the 2018 tickets, which I don't remember if I got the all access pass last year, I think I did, but anyways, the main reason I went was because the podcast How Did This Get Made was going to be there. And I fucking live for some How Did This Get Made, which, if you don't know about that podcast, it's not really a true crime podcast at all, but they do occasionally cover terrible movies that are about murder and various other crimes. So that podcast it's a comedy podcast about really terrible movies, and it's fucking hilarious. I've seen them 3 or 4 times now live, and it never gets old. So they were the main reason I got tickets last year. And also because John Douglas, the author of Mindhunter, was there. And the BuzzFeed Unsolved gents were there as well. And I'm into all of that. And it was a great lineup. It's a great lineup every year. Some of the other shows from the 2018 festival included Wine and Crime podcast. Joe Kendo was there from Homicide Hunter, as well as Criminal. And honestly, they really go all out for the festival and get really amazing podcasts and panels together and moderators, and it's a good time. I'm always super excited about the lineup. Another cool thing that they do is they often have pop-up pubs or other events around town that you can attend before or during the festival. Last year, they partnered with the Library of Congress to host an exhibition of true crime literature and artifacts. They also had a pop-up pub. I don't remember what the name of it was, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was, of course, crime themed. And I think there were kind of like crime scenes throughout the bar that you could kind of like take photos, like in a bathtub covered in blood and that type of stuff. I did not go to it, as you can tell. This year, they partnered with Devil's Backbone Brewing Company to create a Death Becomes Us Blood Orange and Tangerine Sparkling Ale that was only available at the festival and at Pub Grimm, where they kicked off the festival. I definitely tried the beer, which I'm not a huge fan of fruity beer, but it was pretty tasty, I must say. It also came in a Death Becomes Us sippy cup, so that might have helped it taste a little better. Swag makes everything better. All right, let's jump into this year's festival. So I got the all access pass again this year, which I highly recommend getting. You get to go to all the shows for a set amount, and I think you save I'd say you save a good bit of money because each of the shows varies in price, and I think if you went to 3 shows, that would equal the same amount as an all access pass when there's usually 7 or 8 shows to go to. So you're definitely getting a deal by getting that all access pass. I will say the downside about getting the all access passes is that you have to buy them without really knowing who's going to be there. I feel like it's really played out well for me in the last couple of years. The lineup has always been amazing. So you're taking a bit of a risk not knowing what the lineup is going to be, but I mean, it's been amazing the last 2 years, so I feel pretty good about buying the pass without knowing who's coming to the festival. I actually think that they have the November 2020 tickets already on sale, the all access passes. So you're essentially buying it not knowing anything about who's going to be there, but it's part of the experience. So the festival kicks off on a Friday night and ends on Sunday, like afternoon/evening. And this year, the opening show on Friday was Side Stories from the creators of Last Podcast on the Left. I'm probably going to get a little hate for this, but I think I've only listened to Last Podcast on the Left a few times, and I'm not all that familiar with it. But I know it's very popular in the true crime podcasting world. I just have never gotten into it. That being said, I did not go to this show. I could not rally myself to go after a full day of work. And because I don't really listen to the podcast, I decided to kind of just let this one go and instead spent the night lounging. I do want to say that the show descriptions and the information that I'm sharing about the festival can be found on the festival's website at brightestyoungthings.com/death-becomes-us. And of course, I'll include all of their social media and website information in the description of this episode. So if you're interested in learning more about the festival, you'll be able to find all that information in the description. All right, back to the shows. Saturday was really my day. There were some great panels and shows on Saturday. They kicked off with Capturing the DC Sniper, which was about the 2002 sniper shootings in the DC area, where 10 people were killed and several others were injured. The panel was fucking amazing. It consisted of, I think there were 4 key FBI agents who solved the case, and again, it was fantastic to hear them speak about the case and the investigation and everything that went into it up to the moment where they caught him and them, I guess. And it was a really great panel, and it was very interesting, and I loved all the little kind of behind the scenes nuggets and bits of information that they shared that, wasn't given to the public during the investigation. And I think a lot of that can be found in, they have an Audible book called Call Me God, The Untold Story of the DC Sniper Investigation. And I think a lot of those little nuggets of information can be, I guess, heard in that Audible book. But yeah, it was really fascinating. I moved to the DC area, so I don't know if I had heard about the DC Sniper. I feel like maybe I did when it happened, but that was a long time ago, so I can't say for sure. But I have heard about it on other podcasts. So I knew a little bit about it going into the panel, but definitely not as much as I would have liked. So it was really great to hear them talk about it and share all that information. And then there were people in the crowd that kind of talked about their experience when they were in the area and how it was just, truly terrifying and locked down the entire area. One of my coworkers was actually around during that time and told me about how terrifying it was to stop at the gas stations along Interstate 95 where the shootings were happening, and she thought that she'd actually stopped at the gas station where one of the victims was shot, but she couldn't quite remember. So it's a really interesting case, and again, it was just, I don't know, I was completely engrossed in the conversation. I was in it. I wanted to hear everything about it. I loved hearing from people who were there when it happened, that were involved with it, and stories about, one of the FBI agents shared the story about how his wife was at that same gas pump filling up her vehicle, just I think he said an hour or something, or a couple minutes, not couple minutes, but 30 to 45 minutes before the sniper shot someone else at that pump. So she was probably in the sniper's crosshairs, and that it was interesting to hear how their own lives were kind of affected by it and how they were involved. So that was a really great panel. Also, sidebar, the festival sets up the panels and shows so that there's time at the end for Q&As. At least they do that for most of the shows. And honestly, the Q&A portion, it's always a wild ride. You never know what people are going to ask. You never know what they're going to say. And depending on the crowd, it can get a little weird. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to that later. But for the podcast, because the podcasts are usually recording the episode live so that they can, post it and air it later, And that's always a fun experience because you get to hear it and be there and participate in person. And then you can go back and listen to the episode later that you're like in. So I always enjoy that experience. But that being said, a lot of the podcasts that I mentioned do have episodes from the festival. So you can definitely go and find them and listen to those episodes if you want to hear what they talked about. The second show on Saturday was the Homicide Hunter retirement party with Joe Kinda and Carl Marino, who plays Joe, like a younger Joe in Homicide Hunter. This, I don't want to say it was my favorite, but it was definitely like number 2 or 3 on the list. I really fucking enjoyed the show. It was so enjoyable, and Joe Kinda is a fucking badass. Like, I loved listening to him talk about his 9 seasons of Homicide Hunter and all the behind the scenes like information that they share. I really love that. It's maybe one of my favorite things that happen with panels and podcasts, like just hearing about all the shit that goes on behind the scenes that you don't know about. Like the fact that he refuses to use scripts. He literally just talks to the camera. I find that amazing. I never would have known. They also played like some hilarious clips and outtakes, and there was a nice, montage of his my's. And to top it off, his wonderful wife Kathy came out and joined them and shared some of her stories as well. So it was definitely one of my favorite shows. It was great. But of course, like there's also some kind of like sad parts. There was a lot of discussion and conversation around PTSD and how the show was really a form of therapy for him, and that sharing his story and doing that show really helped him deal with a lot of the shit that he'd seen throughout his career. And I thought that was great. I thought it was amazing that he was talking so openly about it, and then hearing him talk about how his cases have affected him and how the show was his therapy. And then there were a lot of law enforcement members or spouses of law enforcement members and military members in the crowd that opened up about their own experiences and had questions about dealing with those types of experiences. And, he had advice for them. And so that was like a really touching kind of Q&A session, and information that was shared during that was again, it was really touching. And I think it, again, kind of made this one of my favorite shows because there was a lot of kind of heart behind the discussion, especially towards the end during the Q&A. So following Homicide Hunter on Saturday was Jensen and Holes, the Murder Squad. Woo woo. So I'm a big Murder Squad fan, and they're of course in the same family as My Favorite Murder. And yeah, I was super pumped to see Jensen and Holes. I really love the Murder Squad. It's a great podcast. Highly recommend it. Paul Holes is a retired cold case investigator, and he was involved in solving the Golden State Killer case a few years ago. And Billy Jensen is an investigative journalist, and together they have formed the Murder Squad, where they look at unsolved murders, unidentified remains, and missing person cases, and kind of run through the facts. So essentially, you get to listen to all the facts about these cases, and then they ask you to help find information about the case. So if you're interested in kind of being a citizen sleuth or getting involved in, unsolved cases, this podcast is one way to do that. And at the festival, they covered The Freeway Phantom, which is episode 36 on their podcast. And it's about a serial killer in the 1970s that murdered 6 young women in DC. And of course, they have more information on their website that you can go to, or their podcast page. So definitely check that out. On their website, they have information on each of the victims that range in age from 13 years old to 18 years old. I don't think I had ever heard of this case. So again, it was just so interesting and fascinating to hear them cover the case and share what information they had. And it honestly made me want to go out and start investigating. Like I was like, I could do this. I could help out with this. And that's one of the reasons why I like this podcast so much, because it kind of like makes you want to get involved in some way with these unsolved cases. And so, yeah, I really enjoy the Murder Squad. So this was another one of the shows that I loved. And I also saw them both at last year's festival. I don't think they were the Murder Squad at that point. I feel like they were just discussing a case, probably the Golden State Killer, but I don't remember exactly. But they're definitely up in my top 3 from this festival. So it'd be like Homicide Hunter, then Jensen and Holes, and I'll tell you number 1 when I get to it. The last show on Saturday was Throwing Shade with comedians Brian Safi and Aaron Gibson, and they had a special guest who was Latrice motherfucking Royale. And listen, I love Latrice Royale. I love her a lot, but by the time that show started at 8:30 p.m., I was fucking tired. I was real tired. I'd been out and about all day, going from show to show, and I didn't have it in me to stay. Like, I'm a hermit. So the fact that I got out and socialized for like 8 hours straight that day, that was a big win for me. And I was exhausted. That being said, I've heard amazing things about Throwing Shade. It's one of the podcasts I have on my list to listen to, but I have too many podcasts and not enough time. So they've been put on the waiting list. I'll get to them eventually, I promise. They cover pop culture, women's and LGBTQ issues, and make it funny and a good time as they do it. So I'm a little bummed that I missed that podcast and that I didn't stay to see Latrice. Yeah, like I said, a little bummed I missed this one, but it was a choice I made, but I stand by my choice. And, you know, hopefully if Throwing Shade comes back next year, it will be one that I definitely stick around to enjoy. All right. We are on the last day of the festival. They kicked off Sunday with BuzzFeed Unsolved. And this is where we get into the young peoples. So I love the BuzzFeed guys. I watch all their shows. I don't watch their YouTube stuff, but I know that's like a whole other world and people really, really love it. But I try my best to keep up with the different shows that you can stream. They have BuzzFeed Unsolved, BuzzFeed Supernatural, BuzzFeed True Crime, I think. I don't know. I feel like they have like 3 or 4 shows. I lose track. But they're definitely one of the more popular shows that they have at the festival. So both years that they've been there, the auditorium has been packed. And again, their audience, it's primarily younger people between the ages of like 13 and 18. And I don't know, it's a young crowd and it makes me feel old and intimidated. Like I don't want the young folks to come for me if I like say the wrong thing, and they're traveling in large packs and groups, and so I kind of just sit there and try to enjoy the show. But the crowd at the show is always interesting. Last year there were a lot of tears. People were just like overcome by their joy in meeting the BuzzFeed gents. And the Q&A section for the show is, again, it is always a wild ride. Like you never know what questions are going to be asked. Last year there was a lot of like hugging and gift giving, and again like tears and like what I would consider to be very much oversharing about my personal life and ghost stories. And again, it was wild. I was not prepared for that type of reaction. But this year I went in knowing that that was kind of where this was going to go. It kind of like, I've never been to like Comic-Con or any type of con, but I imagine it's very similar to that, where people are just like so into whomever they're seeing that they are just like overcome with emotion. I've never had that experience, but I mean, you do you, man. If that's what you're feeling, feel it. And at this year's festival, I do think there were far less tears, definitely less hugs, and the questions were a little better. So I will say, again, like there were a group of younger folks sitting behind us, and the BuzzFeed guys, they're my age. They're like in their early 30s, early to mid 30s. And there was like a 15-year-old sitting behind me just yelling "Okay Boomer" at them through like the entire show. And there was a part of me that wanted to turn around and just say, listen, you're not using that correctly, and also they're not boomers. But then I was afraid that I would come off as a boomer, so I had to control myself. But again, the crowd is part of the experience for that show, 100%. So this year they covered the Men in Black episode that they had recorded previously, I think in maybe an earlier, like one of the first seasons. I'm sure if I was a true fan, I could tell you all of the exact information you need to know to find that episode, but I'm not, and therefore this is what you get. And last year they did I think what they do on YouTube is called a post-mortem, where they talk about the episode that they had just released or something of that sort. And so they did that last year it was like supernatural based instead of unsolved. But yeah, it was good. It's a good time. Like, I really enjoy those shows, even though, again, the crowd is like a little wild. Everyone's in their feels. And again, that's fine. Like, if that's, do your thing. They're always hilarious. I really enjoy watching them, watching their shows, and then seeing them live. Like, they're just as great as they are on the screen. Like, the energy is always fantastic. So I would highly, highly recommend seeing BuzzFeed Unsolved or Supernatural or any of those live, because they're highly entertaining. And I would say this was probably my number 4. So now we have Homicide Hunter, Jensen and Holes, and BuzzFeed. That's 2, 3, and 4. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is my number 1 pick from the festival. It was the closer. It was the closing show for the Death Becomes Us festival in DC, and it was my favorite show of the entire thing. And it was The Truth About True Crime with Amanda Knox and Lorena Bobbitt Gallo. It was amazing. I teared up a few times throughout the show. I felt inspired throughout the show, and I also felt appalled at the same time. I went through all of my emotions, just like with all the young folks that do go through the BuzzFeed shows. Like, I definitely was feeling my emotions as we kind of went on this wild ride with Amanda Knox and Lorena. It was amazing. The episode was recorded, and I think it's a bonus episode on Amanda Knox's podcast, which again is The Truth About True Crime with Amanda Knox. But it is out there, so definitely listen to it. It was amazing and inspiring to listen to Lorena talk about her experience and where she is now in her life, and how, they talked about how the media kind of sensationalized and exploited her situation as well as Amanda Knox's. And, it was truly stunning how kind of everyone was so caught up in how scandalous it was that she cut off her husband's dick that they weren't having a conversation about how he abused the shit out of her. Like, the abuse and marital rape were essentially left out of the story, and that is just mind-blowing to me. Also, the fact that he was acquitted of marital sexual assault. Like, what the actual fuck? Like, it's truly mind-blowing. Like, I have a hard time figuring it out. But it was, again, amazing to hear her story, and also hear Amanda Knox talk about her experience and how the media sensationalized the cases and the impacts that it had not only on their case but their lives. And it was great to hear that, Lorena took that experience and everything she went through, and she turned it into something good. She created the Lorena Gallo Foundation, that is a nonprofit based here in Virginia that does fundraising for women in shelters who are survivors of abuse. And the foundation also focuses on educating people about domestic violence. So I'll include the link to that Facebook page for the foundation in the episode description as well. So if you're interested in learning more about the work she's doing and how you can contribute, you'll be able to find all of that in the description below. So again, The Truth About True Crime with Amanda Knox is my number 1 pick from the festival. It was probably a lot heavier than the other shows, but I've said it like a bajillion times. It was just absolutely fantastic to hear firsthand from both of them and their experiences. So there you have it. That was the Death Becomes Us True Crime Festival in DC in a nutshell. I really love this festival, honestly. I look forward to it every year, and it just keeps getting better and better. Like every year they do something a little different, and this year they had a lounge on the lower level of the theater where you could, take pictures, you could play true crime trivia for prizes. They had a podcast pitching station where you could pitch your true crime podcast ideas. I did this. I did not do it well. I got super nervous, froze up. So yeah, probably not going to have a true crime podcast anytime soon, but that's okay because I got this one. They also had a couple of exhibits. I think one of them was evidence and items or artifacts related to the DC sniper case. I'm not 100% sure on that. And the other was had items from the O.J. Simpson trial, and then other items that belonged to Nicole Brown Simpson, like family photos, personal items, and things related to her life. And those were all on loan from the Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Verdict time, I'd say 10 for 10. Highly recommend. Do it. Go to the Death Becomes Us festival, especially if you love true crime. I mean, this is made for us. It caters to true crime lovers. Also highly recommend just checking out the Brightest Young Things website for shit to do around DC. They have amazing recommendations, and I peruse their site frequently for things to do. It may have been how I found the festival in the first place. I don't have any guests to thank this week, but I do want to say thank you to my listeners. I appreciate every single one of you. You're all fucking amazing. Be sure to check out my social media. Instagram is @FunWithFriendsPodcast. Twitter is @FunFriendsPod1. And I also have, we're also on Facebook @FunFriendsPodcast on there. You can also email me at funfriendspodcast@gmail.com. You can leave me a voice message on Anchor FM. Tell me about your experience at the Death Becomes Us festival. If you went, I would love to hear. I'd also love to hear why you love true crime, what got you into it. If you are enjoying the podcast, please consider donating, which you can do through Anchor FM. Or if you're looking to be a sponsor, you can do that through Anchor FM as well, because I don't have any sponsors right now besides Anchor FM. So, hit me up, let me know. And yeah, I will see you all in the new year. So happy holidays from the Fun with Friends podcast, and happy new year. Bye.